At the turn of the century, no American family stood higher than the Roosevelts. Theodore Roosevelt filled the history books with his battles and reforms, but his 6 children were part of the story, too. They grew up to be soldiers, public servants, adventurers, and symbols of a new American aristocracy. But their lives weren't only about privilege. One son was lost to war, another was caught up in scandal, and behind the famous Roosevelt name were struggles that felt all too human. So what really happened to them? Let's find out. Number 6. Alice Lee Roosevelt. Alice Lee Roosevelt was born on February 12, 1884, the first child of Theodore Roosevelt and his adored wife, Alice Hathaway Lee. Her arrival should have been pure joy. But tragedy came almost immediately. 2 days after Alice's birth, her mother died of kidney failure. On that very same day, Theodore's own mother passed away in the same house. The double loss nearly broke him. Overcome with grief, he could not bear to hear his late wife's name. He never called his daughter Alice, choosing instead to call her Baby Lee. In those first years, Alice lived mostly with her aunt while Theodore tried to outrun his sorrow. When he remarried Edith Caro in 1886, Alice returned to live with her father and stepmother. Edith raised her with kindness, alongside the 5 children she would have with Theodore, but Alice always felt set apart, a little different, a little outside the family circle. That sense of being both cherished and apart would shape her fierce independence later in life. Everything changed in 1901 when Theodore Roosevelt became president. Suddenly, Baby Lee was America's first daughter. At 17, Alice swept into the White House with the energy of a whirlwind. She was bold, dazzling, and impossible to ignore. The press adored her. She smoked in public, bet on horse races, zipped through Washington in fast cars, and even kept a pet snake named Emily Spinach. While the nation was enchanted, her father admitted defeat. "I can run the country," he said, "or I can attend to Alice, but I cannot do both." In 1906, Alice married Congressman Nicholas Longworth of Ohio in a White House ceremony that captured national attention. But the marriage never lived up to its fairy tale beginning. Longworth was older, fond of drink, and unfaithful. Alice, for her part, carried on her own affairs, including a decades-long relationship with Senator William Borah, who many believed was the true father of her only child, Paulina, born in 1925. She turned her home into a political salon, where senators, diplomats, and journalists gathered. Alice's tongue was as sharp as her mind, and her wit became legendary. She delighted in mocking her cousins Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, calling Franklin's New Deal policies foolish and referring to Eleanor's activism with disdain. She was fiercely isolationist, urging America to stay out of foreign entanglements before World War II. Her voice mattered. People in Washington called her the Other Washington Monument. Behind the sharpness, though, was loneliness. Her daughter Paulina struggled with depression and died young in 1957, leaving behind a little girl, Joanna, whom Alice raised. In her old age, Alice softened toward Joanna in ways she had not with her own daughter, perhaps trying to mend, in the only way she knew, the gaps in affection that had scarred her own life. Alice outlived nearly everyone of her generation. She saw the world change from horses to airplanes, from the Gilded Age to the Cold War. Through it all, she remained a fixture in Washington, sitting in her armchair with her cutting comments, observing everything but letting no one see too deeply inside her. By the mid-1950s, Alice's health began to falter. She broke her hip in 1955, and the following year she was diagnosed with breast cancer. A mastectomy saved her then, but cancer returned in 1970, forcing another operation. Politics had always been part of Alice's world, though her allegiances shifted with time. A lifelong Republican, she surprised many when she grew close to the Kennedys and to Lyndon Johnson. In 1964, she voted Democratic, and by 1968 she was openly backing Robert F. Kennedy. After his assassination, though, she returned to old loyalties, supporting her friend Richard Nixon in 1968 and again in 1972. Nixon adored her, once calling Alice the most interesting conversationalist of the age. Their phone calls, preserved on the White House tapes, reveal her sharp tongue, especially her barbs at Democratic nominee George McGovern. She kept up her presence in Washington society through one administration after another. Gerald Ford she liked well enough. Jimmy Carter she refused to meet, dismissing him as graceless. Yet even Carter, in his statement after her death, praised her with the words, "She had style, she had grace, and she had a sense of humor that kept generations of political newcomers to Washington wondering which was worse, to be skewered by her wit or to be ignored by her." Over her lifetime, Alice met 16 U.S. presidents, starting with Grover Cleveland and ending with Gerald Ford, a record no one else is thought to have matched. Her final years were slowed by emphysema and chronic illness, but her wit never dimmed. She died on February 20th, 1980, just after her 96th birthday, in her house on Embassy Row. She was buried in Rock Creek Cemetery in Washington, D.C., the longest-lived child of any U.S. president. Alice's wit was legendary. She kept a needlepoint pillow on her sofa that read, "If you can't say something good about someone, sit right here by me." To Senator Joseph McCarthy, who once joked about calling her Alice, she shot back, "The trash man and the policeman may call me Alice, but you may not." When Lyndon Johnson tried to kiss her, she explained she wore wide-brimmed hats for exactly that reason. And when a senator was exposed for an affair with a much younger woman, she quipped, "You can't make a soufflé rise twice." In her own words, Alice described herself as a hedonist. In the eyes of Washington, she was much more. The capital's eternal grande dame, armed with a sharp tongue, a sense of fun, and a lifetime of history in her pocket. Number 5. Theodore Ted Roosevelt, Jr. Theodore Ted Roosevelt, Jr. was born on September 13, 1887, in Oyster Bay, New York, the eldest child of Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Kermit Caro, and the first of the president's second marriage. From the moment he arrived, people saw him as his father's mirror. He carried the same name, the same look, even the same gestures. With that resemblance came expectation, and from boyhood, Ted lived in the long shadow of Theodore Sr. He grew up at Sagamore Hill, the bustling Roosevelt family home, where energy was a rule of life. His father preached the strenuous life, hikes through the woods, boxing matches, hunting trips, and endless activity. Ted tried to keep up, but the truth was he wasn't built like his father. He suffered from asthma and severe migraines, often left drained while his father seemed inexhaustible. Still, Ted pushed himself, determined not to fall short of the family ideal. Like his father, he went to Harvard, graduating in 1909. Intelligent and well-liked, he had charm of his own, but the Roosevelt name often overshadowed his accomplishments. In 1910, he married Eleanor Butler Alexander, a partnership that brought steadiness and joy to his life. Together they raised 4 children, Grace, Theodore III, Cornelius, and Quentin, named for Ted's youngest brother, who would later die in World War I. Ted began his career in investment banking in Philadelphia, but the pull of service and the family tradition soon redirected him. When World War I broke out, he and his brother Archibald enlisted. Ted was sent to France as a major with the 26th Infantry Regiment, while Eleanor joined the war effort too, supervising women working with the YMCA. For both of them, it was the beginning of years shaped by duty, sacrifice, and the costs of war. In France during World War I, Ted proved himself. He was gassed, shot in the knee, and nearly killed, saved only because his brother-in-law, a doctor, treated him under fire. He left the war permanently disabled, his leg a constant reminder of the price he'd paid. For his courage, he received decorations from both the United States and France. When the war ended, Ted turned to politics. He served in the New York State Assembly, then stepped into the role his father once held, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Presidents Harding and Coolidge later sent him overseas, first as governor of Puerto Rico, 1929 to 1932, and then as Governor General of the Philippines, 1932 to 1933. Ted respected the people he governed and pushed for more self-rule, which won him admirers but also critics who thought he went too far. Back in the U.S., politics was tougher. He was a Republican, but his cousin Franklin D. Roosevelt, now a Democrat in the White House, dominated the political stage. The family connection made Ted's path complicated. Ambition was there, but the highest offices never came. His true legacy arrived in World War II. Despite his age, bad leg, and heart problems, Ted refused to sit on the sidelines. Commissioned as a brigadier general, he joined the 4th Infantry Division. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, he became the only general to land with the first wave at Normandy. Limping ashore with a cane, he cracked jokes, gave orders, and steadied terrified young soldiers. When his men landed in the wrong place, Ted scouted a path himself and simply said, "We'll start the war from right here." That calm courage helped secure Utah Beach. For the men who saw him that day, leading not from behind but from the sand and surf beside them, Ted became unforgettable. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, though it came after his death. Just a month later, on July 12, 1944, Ted died of a heart attack in Normandy. He was 56. He was buried in the American cemetery there, beside his youngest brother Quentin, killed in World War I. 2 Roosevelt brothers, 2 wars, 1 soil. Number 4. Kermit Roosevelt. Kermit Roosevelt was born on October 10, 1889, in Oyster Bay, New York, the second son of Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Kermit Caro. He inherited his mother's name and much of her quiet intensity. Unlike his older brother Ted, who carried the burden of their father's name, Kermit was freer in spirit. He was a boy who loved books, languages, and far-off horizons. From an early age, Kermit showed a gift for languages and curiosity about the wider world. He absorbed new tongues easily, eventually becoming proficient in at least 9. While his siblings threw themselves into sports and military drills, Kermit often wandered alone, reading and thinking. But when adventure called, he answered. He joined his father on hunts and hikes, learning early the Roosevelt family creed that life was meant to be lived strenuously. In 1909, Kermit's bond with his father deepened when he accompanied him on the famous African safari. At 20 years old, Kermit kept pace with the former president, carrying rifles, helping catalog specimens, and absorbing both the thrill and the brutality of the hunt. His father relied on him, perhaps more than on any of the other children. When Theodore planned another expedition in 1913, this time to Brazil to explore the uncharted River of Doubt, Kermit joined again. The journey was disastrous: tropical disease, dangerous rapids, constant hunger. At one point, Theodore nearly died of infection, and it was Kermit who kept him alive, guiding him through the jungle, making sure he did not give up. Their survival came at a cost. Theodore returned broken in health, and Kermit returned haunted by the hardships. Back in the U.S., Kermit enrolled at Harvard and graduated in just 3 years. He tried to settle into civilian life, working briefly as a banker in Buenos Aires. But war interrupted. In 1917, when World War I erupted, Kermit joined the British Army even before America entered the fight. He served with honor in the Middle East. When the U.S. finally joined, he transferred to the American Army and became a captain. Unlike his brothers, he escaped without physical wounds. Peace did not suit him. Restless, he started a steamship company, traveled constantly, and wrote books about his adventures. But the Great Depression crippled his finances. He battled alcoholism and depression, illnesses that the Roosevelt family often treated as private shames. His marriage to Belle Wyatt Willard, daughter of a U.S. ambassador, gave him 4 children, but Kermit's demons followed him everywhere. When World War II came, he sought redemption. He joined the U.S. Army once again, but his health and alcoholism betrayed him. Declared unfit for duty, he was briefly discharged, only to be reinstated after pulling strings through family connections. Assigned to the remote post of Fort Richardson in Alaska, Kermit lived in isolation, far from the battlefields where his brothers were serving. On June 4, 1943, in his quarters at Fort Richardson in Alaska, Kermit Roosevelt ended his life with a gunshot wound to the head. He was found by Dr. Sanford Couch Monroe, who later filed the autopsy report. To spare his mother, Edith, the truth, the family told her he had died of a heart attack. He was buried at Fort Richardson National Cemetery near Anchorage, where a stone gateway was later built in his memory in 1949. Kermit's name lived on in unexpected places. Towns in Texas, West Virginia, and North Dakota were named after him, as was a U.S. Navy ship, the USS Kermit Roosevelt, ARG-16. An annual military lecture series, shared between British and American officers, also honors his memory. His life has continued to appear in culture and fiction. Writers and filmmakers have cast him in roles large and small, from Wilbur Smith's Assegai and William Boyd's An Ice Cream War to Louis Bayard's Roosevelt's Beast, which reimagines his adventures on the Rondon Roosevelt expedition. He shows up in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and in novels centered on his siblings, like Kimberly Brubaker Bradley's The President's Daughter. It's a strange legacy for a man so restless in life. Kermit Roosevelt's story echoes in place names, ships, and stories, even if his own final chapter was one of sorrow and silence. Number 3. Ethel Caro Roosevelt. Ethel Caro Roosevelt was born on August 13, 1891, at Sagamore Hill in Oyster Bay, Long Island, the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Kermit Caro. She grew up in a lively household alongside her half-sister Alice and her 4 brothers, Ted, Kermit, Archie, and Quentin. From an early age, Ethel showed a knack for leadership. Her father once remarked admiringly that she had a way of doing everything and managing everybody. At Sagamore Hill, she threw herself into the rough-and-tumble games of her siblings, and especially loved long rides on horseback with her mother. When William McKinley was assassinated in 1901 and Theodore Roosevelt became president, Ethel was just 10 years old. Life shifted from Sagamore Hill to the White House, and she quickly adapted. While her brothers often ran wild through the halls, Ethel took on a more serious role. She frequently helped her mother, taking charge of ordering meals and delegating tasks to the staff. Responsibilities unusual for a girl her age, but ones she carried with calm confidence. Unlike her half-sister Alice, who thrived in the spotlight, Ethel preferred to keep a lower profile. She was reserved by nature, and her mother reinforced the idea that a proper woman should only appear in the newspapers 3 times in her life: at her birth, her marriage, and her death. At school, she sometimes struggled to make friends, her father's prominence making her feel set apart from her peers. Still, Ethel came of age with quiet dignity. On December 28, 1908, just before the Roosevelt family left the White House, she had her official debut and coming-out party in the East Room. She was 17, poised, capable, and ready to step beyond the shadows of her more flamboyant half-sister, carrying herself with the same practicality and steadiness that had marked her since childhood. When war came to Europe in 1914, Ethel Roosevelt Derby was ready to serve. She had married Dr. Richard Derby, a surgeon, the year before, and when he went to France during World War I, she joined him. While Richard operated, Ethel worked as a nurse at the American Ambulance Hospital, becoming the first of Theodore Roosevelt's children to see service in the war. Her devotion to nursing and public service never faded. In the decades that followed, she remained deeply involved with the Red Cross. During World War II, she chaired the Nassau County chapter and later led the county's nursing service. Her dedication was tireless, her correspondence filling years of files that still sit in the archives of the Nassau County Red Cross. When the organization brought her a pin to honor 50 years of service, they discovered they had underestimated her. It was not 50 years, but 60. Ethel never sought glamour in recognition. When it came time to have her portrait painted, she chose not an evening gown or jewels, but her Red Cross uniform, the truest symbol of her life's work. She also threw herself into preserving her family's legacy. Ethel spent years helping turn Sagamore Hill into a National Historic Site, ensuring her childhood home would be protected for generations to come. She was also a pioneer in her own right, becoming one of the first 2 women ever to serve on the Board of Trustees of the American Museum of Natural History. On April 4, 1913, Ethel married Richard Derby, the steady, devoted partner with whom she would share her life. Together, they raised 4 children while balancing careers of medicine and service. Their marriage endured war, long separations, and the burdens of public duty. In her later years, Ethel Roosevelt Derby turned her energy toward the American Civil Rights Movement, a cause she had quietly supported for decades. She believed, much like her cousin Eleanor Roosevelt, that change began at the local level. Ethel was less visible than Eleanor, but no less determined. When she saw black residents of Oyster Bay facing discrimination, she acted. Ethel organized a committee to bring low-income housing to the community. At first, the proposal was met with resistance from local residents, but Ethel persisted. She gathered friends at her home, patiently persuaded them of the project's importance, and eventually won enough support to see it completed. It was a small victory by national standards, but for Ethel it mattered deeply, solving injustice where she lived. Even as her health began to fail, she remained engaged. In 1960, she and her daughter Edith appeared at the Republican National Convention, where Ethel delivered a seconding speech for Richard Nixon's presidential nomination. By the mid-1970s, her strength was waning. Yet in 1977, just months before her death, she made one last journey to Washington to visit President Jimmy Carter and First Lady Rosalind Carter at the White House. That December, Ethel Roosevelt Derby passed away at the age of 86 at her longtime home in Oyster Bay. She was laid to rest at Young's Memorial Cemetery, near her parents, her husband, and her brothers. Ethel lived her life far from the limelight that her half-sister Alice embraced and without the flamboyance of her famous brothers. Instead, she built her legacy on service, compassion, and quiet determination. From nursing in wartime France to Red Cross leadership at home, from preserving Sagamore Hill to championing civil rights in her own community, she carried the Roosevelt tradition in her own steady, practical way. Her life was proof that not all history is made in headlines. Some of it is written in steady work, in small victories, and in devotion to others. Number 2. Archibald Bullock Roosevelt. Archibald Bullock Roosevelt was born on April 9, 1894 at Sagamore Hill, the Roosevelt family home in Oyster Bay, New York. He was the second youngest son of Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Caro Roosevelt, named for Archibald Bullock, a Revolutionary War ancestor. Archie grew up in the rarefied world of the White House, his childhood shaped by privilege, but also by the relentless expectations of being Theodore Roosevelt's son. Quieter and more reserved than his older brothers Ted Jr. and Kermit, Archie had a sharp mind and a mischievous streak. He wasn't as robust as his father would have liked, but Theodore believed all of his children should live the strenuous life. Archie gamely joined in the roughhouse games and wild escapades of his siblings, often proving himself cleverer than reckless. He entered Harvard University in 1913, but the course of his life shifted when America entered World War I. Archie graduated in 1917 and immediately enlisted. In France, Archie served as an officer with the U.S. Army. He distinguished himself in combat, leading his men with steady resolve. During a fierce battle, artillery fire struck his unit, and Archie was gravely wounded. His leg was shattered, leaving him with lifelong difficulty walking. Yet his bravery under fire did not go unnoticed. He received the Silver Star with an oak leaf cluster and the French Croix de Guerre. After the war, Archie returned home carrying both medals and scars. He built a career in business, first with Sinclair Consolidated Oil Company and later in finance. When the Teapot Dome scandal erupted in the 1920s, he quietly distanced himself from Sinclair to avoid being tainted by the corruption. Archie valued stability and discretion, preferring the quiet work of providing for his family to the flamboyance and spotlight that some of his siblings sought. But war returned. When World War II began, Archie, despite his crippled leg, petitioned his cousin, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, for a commission. He was granted command and returned to the Army as a lieutenant colonel. Once again, he served with distinction. And once again, disaster struck. Archie was wounded in the same leg, aggravating the old injury from 25 years earlier. He became the only American soldier officially classified as 100% disabled for the same wound in 2 different wars. Forced into retirement, Archie lived with both pride and bitterness. He had served his country bravely, but his body carried the scars forever. In later years, he became active in conservative politics, supporting organizations such as the John Birch Society. He was outspoken in his criticism of communism and the liberal policies of the mid-20th century, often clashing with the progressive legacy of his cousin Franklin. In the spring of 1917, just as the United States entered World War I, Archie Roosevelt married Grace Lockwood, daughter of Thomas Lockwood and Emmeline Stackpole. Their wedding took place at Emmanuel Church in Boston on April 14th. It marked the beginning of a long partnership that would endure war, hardship, and personal tragedy. The couple settled in Cold Spring Harbor, New York, not far from Sagamore Hill. They made their home in a pre-revolutionary house on Turkey Lane, where they raised 4 children. Their eldest, Archibald Bullock Roosevelt, Jr., 1918 to 1990, carried the family name forward and later married Selwa Lucky Shoker Roosevelt. Their second child, Theodora, 1919 to 2008, found her own path as a dancer and novelist, writing under the name Theodora Keogh. 2 younger daughters followed, Nancy Dabney Roosevelt, 1923 to 2010, and Edith Kermit Roosevelt, 1927 to 2003, who studied at Barnard College and became the mother of journalist Margot Roosevelt. Archie and Grace's marriage was steady and enduring, though not without heartbreak. In 1971, after more than 50 years together, Grace was killed in a car accident near their home. Archie had been driving. The loss devastated him, but he carried on quietly in the years that followed. On October 13, 1979, Archie Roosevelt died of a stroke at the Stewart Convalescent Home in Florida. He was 85, the last surviving child of Theodore and Edith Roosevelt, though his half-sister Alice Roosevelt Longworth would outlive him by 4 more months. He was laid to rest beside Grace at Young's Memorial Cemetery in Oyster Bay under a tombstone inscribed with the words, "The old fighting man home from the wars." Archie left behind not only his children, but a proud legacy carried on by his descendants. His grandson, Tweed Roosevelt, b. 1942, became chairman of Roosevelt China Investments and president of the Theodore Roosevelt Association, dedicated to preserving the legacy of the family's most famous patriarch. Archibald Roosevelt's life never reached the flamboyant heights of some of his siblings, but it was marked by courage, service, and steadiness. He was, as his epitaph suggests, a soldier first. A fighting man who carried the scars of war, built a quiet life of family and service, and eventually came home. Number 1. Quentin Roosevelt. Quentin Roosevelt was born on November 19, 1897, at the family estate of Sagamore Hill, the youngest child of President Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Caro Roosevelt. By the time he was 3, his father was President of the United States, and Quentin's boyhood unfolded in the most famous house in America. Unlike his elder brothers, Quentin grew up entirely in the White House. He was lively, mischievous, and full of charm. Together with friends, including Charlie Taft, the son of President William Howard Taft, Quentin led the White House Gang, a group of rambunctious children who played pranks, fired spitballs at portraits, and raced through the hallways. His high spirits made him popular with the press and beloved by his father, who saw in Quentin the sparkle of youth he cherished most. Quentin was bright as well as playful. He excelled at mechanics, loved tinkering with machines, and had a natural gift for flying. At Harvard University, he studied engineering, but his studies were interrupted by the call of war. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Quentin enlisted in the Army Air Service. For the Roosevelt family, whose creed was service and sacrifice, it was no surprise. Assigned to France in 1918, Quentin quickly proved himself a daring pilot. Fellow aviators admired his skill and cheerfulness, even in the grim realities of war. At 20 years old, he was the youngest Roosevelt son to serve overseas. He was also engaged to Flora Payne Whitney, the great-granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, a match that promised a bright future once peace returned. That future never came. On July 14, 1918, during the Second Battle of the Marne, Quentin's squadron engaged German planes over the French countryside. Outnumbered 3-1, his aircraft was shot down near Camaret, France. Quentin was killed instantly. His body was buried with military honors by the Germans, who respected both his bravery and his famous father. The news of Quentin's death devastated Theodore Roosevelt. Of all his children, Quentin was the one he had doted on most, the one who embodied the youthful energy he loved. To lose Quentin, he wrote, was like having the light go out of the house. Only 6 months later, Theodore himself died in his sleep, broken in health and spirit. Many believed grief over Quentin hastened his end. In 1955, Quentin's remains were moved to the Normandy American Cemetery, reinterred beside his brother Ted Jr., who had died after D-Day in 1944. Together, the two brothers, one killed in youth, the other in middle age, rest in the soil of France, where they had fought under different wars but for the same cause, Quentin Roosevelt's death in 1918 left a lasting mark not only on his family, but also on the towns and people who remembered the young aviator who fell from the sky. In France, near the village where his plane went down, locals built a small monument. In 2007, members of the Roosevelt family and the Theodore Roosevelt Association returned there to help restore it, keeping alive the memory of a boy whose life ended far too soon. His name lived on through the next generation. Ted Roosevelt's youngest son was christened Quentin Roosevelt II in his honor, though fate proved just as cruel. He too died young, in a plane crash in 1948. Across France, the memory of Quentin is still etched in stone and streets. A road in Château-Thierry bears his name, as does a garden of remembrance in the rebuilt village of Sancy-les-Cheminots, which had been destroyed in the war. The villages of Saintes, Maupertuis, and Touquin, where Quentin had been stationed, held ceremonies on the 90th anniversary of his death, honoring not just him, but all the American aviators who once filled their skies. Back in the United States, his name became part of the landscape. A community in Pennsylvania was called Quentin, and in Brooklyn, Avenue Q was renamed Quentin Road in 1922. Garden City, New York, named a boulevard after him and built Roosevelt Field, once an airfield and now a shopping mall, as a tribute. Naval Air Station North Island in California also carries a Quentin Roosevelt Boulevard. His story even found its way into children's literature. In the 1953 classic Brighty of the Grand Canyon, a years with his father Theodore Lion Hunt, a fictional glimpse of the adventurous boy he had been. Quentin Roosevelt died at just 20, but his name crossed oceans, etched into towns, streets, airfields, and memorials. For those who remembered him, he was more than a fallen pilot. He was the symbol of a generation of young men whose lives ended in the Great War, their youth frozen in time but their names carried forward. And that's what happened to Theodore Roosevelt's 6 children. They carried the Roosevelt name with pride, but also with pain. Some found purpose in service and adventure, while others struggled with scandal and loss. One gave his life in war. Another lived in the shadow of expectation. Together, their stories remind us that even in America's most celebrated families, greatness often comes with a heavy cost. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into history, please like, subscribe, and join me next time as we uncover more of the untold stories behind the names we think we know.